Welcome everyone. My name is Lavinia Rogers. I'm the World Language Specialist at the Maine Department of Education, and we are thrilled to have Julie Spano join us today. We are recording this session, and then we're asking that you also hold your questions until the last 5 or 10 minutes to allow us to get through all of the content that we have. So Julie began her career in 1993 while studying in Moscow and has taught ESL, Russian, and Spanish to children and adults of all ages. She's currently teaching kindergarten through 4th grade Spanish at Camden Rockport Elementary, having developed the program from its inception in 1998. She's given over 250 hours of presentations in Maine and around the country, serving as the NEL Maine representative, the board chair at Penobscot School, and is the current representative for Flame, as well as a member of the hashtag Early Lang chat moderating team on Twitter. In 2018, Julie had the honor of being the keynote speaker at the NEL Summer Institute and has twice had presentations named Best of Maine at the Flame Conference held each March. Regularly consulting with districts and teachers who are looking to implement elementary world language programs, Julie strongly advocates for the rights of young children to experience the benefits of early language instruction. So Julie, thank you so much for joining us and doing this for our community today.
Thank you, Lavinia, and thank you everyone for being here. I see a lot of people that we've met before and had opportunities to talk with, so it's really nice to see everyone. And I really want to start by saying that I will not profess to be an expert in remote learning. Like most of you, I was thrown into it this year in full force in my district, and a huge learning curve for me, as well as I'm sure for many of you. And I really appreciate Lavinia's invitation to just share some of that process that went on, some of the successes, some of the things that worked well, and some things that didn't work really well that were good takeaways for me. I definitely am expecting that I will be remote teaching at least part of the time come the fall. Obviously, most districts have not made decisions around what that's going to look like, but that seems to be the trend. So kind of treating these lessons as, good reflection for going forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen. Here are those processes that we're learning, how to talk about the technology as you're doing it. So I'm going to share the screen just so you can kind of see some of the talking points, and please let us know if you can't see them, but if you could just give a thumbs up, that will be really helpful. Okay. Can that be seen? Okay. I'm hopeful that everyone's got a thumb up. Lavinia, we're good?
Yes, we're all set.
Thank you. Okay, so what I want to just start with is just what it looked like for me in my district, so that some of you may have had similar experiences, and some of you might have had some a little bit different, but this was what it would look like for us in our district. So when the school closed in March, we started the first 4 weeks before April vacation as asynchronous, with weekly activities that all the specialist teachers, so Spanish and art, music, phys ed, and library, we were sending home weekly activities to do that were termed optional. I used Seesaw as my platform for sharing those weekly activities. And up to that point, my students had not used Seesaw before. I had been using it as a communication tool with parents, but we do not have one-to-one devices in our school. So I had not been using it with students. So this was kind of a new way of using it after we closed. I will say that I did feel a little bit ahead of the game in that my district has been doing remote snow days for the last 2 years. So we've had days where kids were at home and doing remote learning. So there was a framework in place. Very thankful about that. But it ended up only being a very tiny leg up once we really started to get into things and realize just the enormity of remote teaching. After April break, it was decided that we wanted to integrate more live activities with our students, both for homeroom teachers and for specials teachers. And so the specials teachers began doing Zoom meetings with students each week. And the way that we structured that was each week we put out a sign-up form. And parents, families could sign up first come, first serve for as many of the specials classes as they wanted to attend for that week. I limited each of those sessions to 25 students. And the other dynamic that was particularly neat about it actually was that we opened it up for kindergarten through 4th grade. So that meant that you could have siblings together in one meeting, and we did that purposely. One of the pieces of feedback that we had heard from families was that as more and more things were being added, it was harder for them to keep track of all of these different things that were going on. And so we intentionally decided that if we had all of K4 together, that might ease some things for those families in terms of just, trying to keep a schedule for themselves. You will note that both of those things, both the asynchronous and the synchronous, and I should say the asynchronous weekly activities that we sent home continued through to the end. So even while we were doing the Zoom meetings, we were also sending home activities each week as well. Both of those, as I was just going to say, were by choice. And that was a dynamic that is certainly an interesting one for the remote learning that we've had during this closure. A lot of emotions on our part around that for many, many different reasons. And I'm sure some of you have experienced that as well. There's a lot of reflection there. So the parameters that I had when I was going into this were, for me, one of the biggest pieces was around equity. And my team had been talking about that a lot. This was a place where having done remote snow days was really fantastic because it had already highlighted equity issues like devices in the home, like spotty internet. We did send home iPads and hotspots to every family who wanted one. But of course, if you have multiple people in the household, devices can be a challenge. And I'm sure you, like me, even with really good internet service, it's not always good internet service. We often have spotty internet at my own home. And so, we knew that was going to be a challenge for families. But additionally, printer availability, meaning if you were sending something home that they had to print out, that wasn't going to be accessible for every family. So that was a consideration and continues to be. Another parameter that, in fact, took me a few weeks to figure out was the parents serving as the facilitators for technology, especially for my younger students, the kindergarten through 2nd grade in particular. They had, as I said, we don't have one-to-one devices at school. So even though kids use iPads, they use them for apps primarily. So other types of things that we were doing online, kids really needed help with that. Or if it was something that needed to be printed out, a kid needed a parent to print it out for them. Or if there was a YouTube link, they had to go to the YouTube for the kid. And that was something that I think I had started out with the idea that they would just kind of like turn the iPad to the kid and the kid would look at what I had put up there and then they would do it. And then I started to realize that that actually wasn't the case, and that parents were having to kind of figure out what it was that I was putting out there. Um, and that was a big moment for me of almost like an, oh no, what do I do now? Because I absolutely was not expecting that. The remote snow day activities that I had done had been, they were things that kids could just look at and watch. And so there wasn't as much parental assistance needed, I think. And so that was a big surprise for me, and one that we're still kind of working on. And then lastly, the other parameter for me was that it was extremely important that I was providing a balance of on-screen and off-screen activities, in part because of the equity issue. I didn't want to depend on crayons and craft supplies or even food, because we know that families do not have all of those things, or certainly not, maybe not what, you know, if I said, oh, let's use pom-poms, well, families might not have pom-poms or popsicle sticks or whatever. So like craft activities and that kind of thing, I had to be really careful to balance those things out. Plus the fact that I feel it's just really important. I'm a hands-on teacher. I want my kids to be doing stuff, and that's been a really hard one for me. So trying to really give some off-screen activities that I could give a prompt, but then they could go off and do something outside or in their home. That was as important for me as providing things. You know, there's some really great resources online. And these, of course, were the challenges that I think most of us faced, but I just kind of wanted to name them. So transitioning my teaching style, I am a 90 to 100% in the target language teacher. I do very little in English. And I'm very, very hands-on, as I said. A lot of manipulatives and counters and, you know, like what we do with little kids. And suddenly having all of that kind of swept away, all the supports of my classroom, all those visuals that were there that really help students and differentiate for students, all of that was suddenly gone, and trying to figure out what that would look like online was definitely hard. The same with the materials. What now works for online was really hard. And I'm sure you know, you could probably sit there and say, yep, me too. And then on top of all of that, learning how to use the technology, right? I had used Zoom before, but always as a participant, never as a host. And then on top of that, all of the little things like sharing the screen and annotating, and, you know, there's lots of neat things that Zoom can do, but I didn't know how to do any of those. Or even just setting up your meeting and then having to organize that with parents and send home notifications and all that kind of stuff. You know, that was all new, and I think is new for all of us. Super glad I had that experience before next fall. But those were kind of the pieces that were really, they were hard. So here are some ways in which I solved some of those challenges and some of those parameters. And I'm going to start, what I decided to do was break it down into asynchronous and synchronous to kind of give you a sense of what those two looked like. I did the asynchronous, as I said, for about, I think like 9 weeks. And the Zoom meetings for four weeks. Couple of sessions each week, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So let's, so does that, are there any, I'm going to actually ask if people can just hold till the end. I thought I would stop, but I think it might be better because it's hard for me to see. This is one of the things about Zoom that I'm not a super fan of. As much as I like to share the screen, then I can't see all of my students, all of the participants, and that was a huge frustration for me when I was doing the Zoom. So let's look at the asynchronous activities. So again, that idea of sending things home for kids to do without me there, right? There were some big pieces that became apparent very quickly. And I should say, I want to just think about this for a moment. Yeah. So one of the things that became apparent really, really quickly was that I had to revise my expectations downward. And by that, I mean that what I would normally be doing and this was for all grade, remember, like, so I was sending, for the asynchronous, I was sending activities specific to each grade level. So I was not sending just one activity for kindergarten through 4th grade. I was sending home a set of activities for kindergarten, a set of activities for 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and 4th grade. So that I was trying to connect them to what we had been doing. We were told not to do any new learning, which also made that a little challenging because especially for the kindergartners who we haven't had a lot of time. But nevertheless, I realized that without all of the supports that I mentioned, so in my classroom, like I said, I'm teaching almost exclusively in Spanish. So I'm utilizing all of my visual supports around the room, our word banks. I'm using myself to convey meaning. My students, they work really much as a community to help one another. And all of that allows for that differentiation for those kids, at the various levels of ability. And certainly my kiddos, I have kids that some of them are novice low and some of them are novice mid, and I have heritage speakers and all the rest in the same classroom. And so all these supports, right, are there to help them. Without all of that, suddenly it became apparent that I had to kind of like dive back down to novice low for my kids in a lot of those asynchronous activities, because I wanted to be sure that they were accessible for everybody. Even for my 4th graders, they are very dependent on some of the things that I show and have around the classroom. And I wanted to really be sure that when I was sending things home that they could do them, especially after I realized that parents were the facilitator, that the students were going to be able to do it independently. Which was another big piece. How do you make that happen? How do you allow kids or provide activities that kids can do somewhat independently? And I would say, and I should have put this here, successfully, because that was the other piece that was so important. All of us as specials recognized this early. Engagement was very slow to build. And in Seesaw, if any of you use Seesaw, you know that you can see who is checking in. And at the beginning, I think everyone was so overwhelmed that there wasn't a lot of engagement. There weren't a lot of parents checking in. Some of them weren't sure how to use it. Some of them had not used it, even though I had it out there. And so I wanted things that would have kids coming back again and again. And if they weren't successful or if they couldn't do them, I knew that they were going to drop quickly and I was going to lose them. And I really just didn't want that to happen. So I went back to lots of activities that were at, as I said, novice low and novice mid, at the lower range of novice mid, right? Now, granted, for my kindergartners, that made sense anyway, and my 1st graders, that made sense anyway, but even for my 3rd and 4th graders, it felt right to bring down my expectations. So activities that worked, and again, some of these were printables and some of these were not. I tried to have as much variety in the types of activities that I sent home to try and hit all of those different equity pieces and what kids and families could do. So some examples: color by numbers, novice low, right? Going back to that idea of, thinking about the proficiency level, single words, single phrases, things that are highly familiar that they can then do independently. So color by numbers were a simple way for kids to still engage with the language by reading and then doing. Not overly taxing, but highly successful because they could do it. And who doesn't love coloring? So I definitely use that, I think for each grade level, maybe once or twice. I sent home a color by number. They were all culturally relevant, so that was important for me. And then I would send home, along with that, I would send home a little bit of information to the parents that they could share with the kids about whatever it was that was in the color by number. So, and then another thing that I did, so again, thinking about those novice low, novice mid, right, really simple stuff, sorting. So I sent home a variety of different sorting challenges for kids. So like you can see here, it's big, it's medium, it's small. So kids had to just find stuff around their house. It could be anything. That was important to me. Like, you don't have to have fancy stuff in order to be able to do these activities. And they just had to sort them and then take a photograph, then do another sort, take a photograph, do another sort, and they could do like 3 or 4 sorts of things that they found around their room or around their house, using those types of headers. So I had a few different headers throughout the 9 weeks with different grade levels. So in this one, it was sizes, and another one I did a color sort. And I'm trying to think, there was one other one, I like and I don't like, that came with things to sort. It's kind of that idea of really, really simple read and do. I will say that many of these I also included a video. Seesaw is really, for those of you who are familiar with it, if you're not, Seesaw is very user-friendly in terms of uploading videos that allowed me to give the instructions and walk through like a demonstration of what to do. And that really helped, I hope, to convey meaning for what I wanted, what the activity was about. Other ideas were taking whatever was around your house. I got this idea from Mrs. Dana in Cape Elizabeth. She had been going out and leaving messages for her kids on trails around their town using sticks. And I thought, what a cool idea. How can I modify that for my students? So I gave them kind of the challenge of spell, and I gave them a list of words that they could choose from. Use anything in your house, but spell it. And so you can see like hola with the carrots. I really wanted them to know that they could use anything. Like, use food, I don't care. Because kids, you know, we don't know what kids have in their homes. And so I just, that idea constantly of every kid has that opportunity to participate. The adios, just with rocks. And then, this is where it got really weird. But if any of you are familiar with ChatterPix as an app, they allow you to take a photograph and then you can draw a line, you can record yourself, and it will make whatever the thing is talk. So I used it to create all of these really short prompts for kids, like this one.
Hola, ¿te gustan las aceitunas?
So, do you like olives? Right, and all that, and because we do, I like and I don't like, and I kind of like and I really like. We do that all the time throughout my. So I had a whole series of these. I had broccoli and cheese and beans and apples and all these different things, and I would just send them home, and then kids could just answer back, just like a little thing, like yes, I like it. No, I don't like it. But I found that those short little videos were really great for prompts. It didn't tax the kids. They were fun, and you could just kind of like pop them in there. I heard that from a lot of other teachers too, that oftentimes those short, like just really quick prompts in a video format were successful for their kids too. And this is something that is a piece of my summer work, is that I want to create a whole bunch more of these to be able to use with kids, even if I'm not remote. Because kids had a lot of fun. Now, kids can use ChatterPix too, so that's even cooler that they can do them, but it was really fun for me to create some of these myself with the googly eyes and all of that. Along with the activities that I was creating, I also did a lot of sending home links for families so that they, so they could interact with other things that were happening online. And one of the wonderful things that came out of this closure, there's always this, you know, like weird silver linings, but one of the things that happened was that there were a number of authors and singer-songwriters and other organizations that started doing things online for kids. Lots of live read-alouds, lots of live events of different types. And so I started sending home those links whenever I found them, so that parents could do those if and whether they wanted to, if they were on Instagram or YouTube or whatever. And I did hear great response from those. Families did engage with some of those and really enjoyed them. So things like Mr. G, he's fantastic. He's been doing these live events on Saturdays. Uno, Dos, Tres, Andres has been doing live concerts, live streaming, along with a lot of other really cool events. For my heritage speakers, and I don't have tons of them, but I do have some. There are also a lot of other organizations that are creating live events, like there is a zoo in Colombia that has these daily, or now they're down now to 3 days a week, but it was 5 days a week. They were having these live sessions where one of the zookeepers would walk around the zoo and they would do these different, they would talk about the animal and show the animal, and you could write in and ask them questions. It's been just amazing. And there's actually a couple of zoos now that are doing that for in Spanish speaking countries. There are a lot of events like that, so I wanted to provide those as things that families could do together or on their own, different, like I said, books that were live read-alouds. I loved these two because they were the voices of the authors, the voices of the illustrators, the voices of these professionals who are out there, and it was a way to almost bring them into the classroom. It's been really neat. And so that's something I definitely want to continue. I hope they continue. But it also, in some ways, made it a little bit easier for me. It took some of the pressure off me to constantly be creating, or, you know, what do I want to say? Adapting, you know, because sometimes I could, one of the things that we really wanted to do was provide read-alouds for our students. And so this was a way for me, instead of me doing the read-aloud, I got to have the actual author do the read-aloud, right? Or the author and the illustrator. So those were very cool. So those were some things that were successful. What I would like to say about not successful, I think, for me, the piece that wasn't successful is that it was very hard to remain connected with families and with students when it was just asynchronous. Some families did not engage at all with anybody, homeroom teacher, specialist teacher, nothing. And so you kind of were like sending these things out into space and you didn't know what was happening. And there was very limited feedback, especially during the first couple of weeks for many reasons. But it made it hard to keep going. You know, as a specials team, none of us were, in fact, I was hearing the most, only because Seesaw allows that and I was the only one who was using it. But it was our what do I want to say? We were starting to lose hope. By the time April break came, we were really we were feeling kind of like down in some respects because we just weren't having the same level of feedback, obviously, that you have in your classroom. And I would get little bits and pieces of, you know, I would run into, we had someone come to pick up our bales of hay from our house, and it just so happened it was the dad of one of my kindergartners. And he says, "Oh, my daughter absolutely loves the videos you've been putting up." Well, they had never said anything online, so I had no idea. So just kind of like felt, you know, like, so that was really hard not to kind of lose the spirit to keep going, even though you didn't know whether or not people were engaging. It is what it is, you know. I think the other secondary piece was, and this kind of goes back to the parents as facilitators, and my having to transition from my teaching style of using almost exclusively Spanish when I realized that parents were the ones that were facilitating and they don't speak Spanish, I then had to figure out how I was going to make it comprehensible for them as well as for my students. And so I started to have kind of like a dual set of instructions, or I would have the activity and that would all be in Spanish, but then I would kind of have this little, I would write notes to the parents and help them to understand. I wouldn't do it all in English because I felt like, hey, you know, you're part of this party here, so you know you're gonna have to like do a little work too. Which I don't know how they felt about that. Some of them were really appreciative. I think some of them were like, oh my gosh. But you know, I would make it bilingual so that they could understand what I was asking, and that was a huge adjustment for me because I'm not used to doing that. I'm used to being in my classroom and being able to support my kids and know when they don't understand something, and having to, as I said, make things comprehensible not just for my students but also for the parents was a very interesting adjustment, which I don't think I fully did successfully, but it's a learning process. There were a lot of aha moments that I will be taking forward with that, plus kind of connecting with parents and asking them, hey, what worked, what didn't work? That's also been really helpful. So then, yeah, so here were two, these were the other two takeaways for me. One was because the technology was not familiar, it occurred to me at one point that it would be really helpful if I had kind of like a little user manual or crib notes for parents so they knew how to use Seesaw, at least for how we were going to use it at the time. Going forward as a school, we've been talking about we're going to have to teach kids the tech that we're going to be using before we go into remote learning, or you know, at the beginning of the year, whereas of course we didn't have that time. It was, hey, we're closed, now we're going into remote learning. And the second one was because I didn't have all these supports that I would normally have in the classroom, it really occurred to me that having some type of little word bank or picture dictionary or something that went home that really had some of those key pieces that I would be using over and over again that are typically in my classroom, but having them at home might be helpful. That's a takeaway for next year, so we'll see what that looks like. But definitely, I feel like that would at least alleviate some of those, oh my gosh, what is she talking about, moments. So those are some thoughts for asynchronous. So it's been such a ride. I'm sure it has been for you guys too. What an adventure. So then April break hits, and we decided after that that all of us in the school, both homeroom teachers and specials, were going to, not only for homeroom teachers, they were going to do more things live, but that specials teachers were going to start doing live. As I mentioned, using Zoom. That was a huge change, and actually a really positive one, because one of the pieces that I think we really recognized very quickly was that it feels much more like face-to-face, right? So many of the activities that we are already doing, we just need to tweak and adjust for the platform. When we first closed, in my mind, I was like, oh my God, I gotta scratch everything and start from zero and remake everything and rethink everything. And that was extremely stressful. And then as I started to get into it, I realized, wait, no, you know, those overarching principles that I have as a teacher, my philosophy, what I think works, I can still use those things. I just have to figure out how to use them with the tech. And that was a big learning curve. One of the big ones that I think is important, whether you are in your classroom or definitely online, is planning your logistics ahead of time. And I often have noted that that is not something that's mentioned with teaching. And I think it is so incredibly important that you have all of your props together and ready to go, that you have thought about what it's going to be like when you're teaching, how you're going to be using your props, where they're going to be, how you're going to organize them through the time and the space that you have with your students. I think about this a lot in my classroom in terms of, you know, like I said, I use lots of visuals and props. For example, I always have them in order so that I'm not fiddling around and looking for the next thing that I want in an activity, that they're all ready to go in the order in which I'm going to use them. With Zoom, that meant that I had to think about the screen and the space as very, very different than being in my classroom, where I'm somewhere in my classroom, but I have a whole classroom to use and walk around, and I'm not worried about whether they can see me, whether they can see what I'm holding up. That was something that drove me crazy with Zoom at the beginning. Like I did this hand clapping game, and I made a visual and then realized that nobody could see it. But I wanted to be able to see all of the kids, so I didn't want to share my screen. And I was like, this is not how I would be doing this in my room. So logistically thinking about what's that going to look like. Those pieces, and then logistically when you have all of the kids there and they're all in these little boxes and you can't see them well. And I'm putting on my glasses to be able to see kids' faces, and I can't see them. I can't see what they're doing. And of course, they're like sliding off of the screen and disappearing. And oh my. All the funny things, if any of you did the live Zoom with your students, all of the very, very funny things that happened during live Zoom. It was crazy. But the logistics of it was just like I said, I just felt that that was so incredibly important and continues to be that piece of, plan it out. And then the other idea being, of course, something that we know really well, but we want to remind ourselves of, is that incorporating those familiar routines and activities. I really started from the beginning thinking of, with Zoom, this is just class. How do we do class? I always start with a greeting, some type of community builder, right? And so that was how I started all my Zooms. I greeted everybody. Kids greeted each other. That was so important to me. Other routines that we do on a regular basis, I checked in to see if anyone had lost a tooth, because that's a big part of our classes normally. And so I wanted to have things that were familiar, that kids knew how to do, so that it made some of these other pieces of me learning the tech a little bit easier to facilitate. And then, of course, we know it. But even so, in the scramble to try and think of, like, what am I going to do on Zoom? It was really important to me to remember. So in the Zoom, there was no English. So again, going back to that idea of I'm using my visuals to convey meaning right now. So how am I going to do that? Going back to the logistics piece of it. But using all those supports, I had to figure out, okay, I'm going to still use those supports. Just because I'm on a computer doesn't mean that I'm not going to bring back those strategies that I always use as a teacher. I'm going to keep using those. And it seems so obvious, but it really was like those moments of, because it was a screen, it kept like running interference in my brain. And so I had to keep saying, yeah, it's a screen, but it's still me teaching. It's still me teaching. It's still my students. And I know what good teaching is, and I know what strategies are really good for conveying meaning. I just have to bring them to this new format. So some things that worked in this realm. I did put up an agenda for each class. You can see them here, the 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see the greeting at the beginning, checking in. This was the first one. This was checking in on their tooth. I then had to kind of incorporate that into the greeting. He lost his little space. And the reason why I say that is because these were kind of at the back here, and then I kind of like bring them forward. So I had to make them so kids could see them. Again, that idea of a visual that they can actually see. So I'm like holding it up like this. So I needed everything to be big. And then we did a movement activity where we acted like sloths and frogs and hummingbirds, and then we did a hand clapping activity. So that was the first one. But just having that agenda there, this is what we're going to do. It has the beginning, a middle, and an end, and we're going to say goodbye. And I did that for each one, and it was really helpful both for me to organize, but also for kids to kind of, these are all things that we always do. I did, this was a funny flop, but it was also a good activity. I love polls. Polls are fantastic for novice learners. kids with all different abilities can access polls, even if all they do is point, which in the classroom that works, not necessarily on Zoom. But I had this dream that the kids were actually going to use the annotation tool in Zoom to add their name to the "what is your favorite color" poll. That can work, but you got to teach them first. And I thought they already knew, and I was wrong. So that was the moment of, oh, okay, I'll type all your names in. And I had wanted them to do the typing because I normally in my class, I will give them sticky notes, or they have their name tags, and they kind of go up a few kids at a time, so it doesn't take forever to get around the circle, which especially for younger kids, as you know, by the time you get to, kid number 18, everybody else is like squirreled out. So I always try to shorten that. So I had thought, we'll shorten it by annotation. It didn't work. But next year, I know that if I teach them how to use the annotation tool first, then we can do polls like this. Because they love doing the polls. They had a great time with that. It was just the tool I had to learn. That was a funny moment. But then also things that we know that work, movie talks, or well, I call them video walks, right? So where you have a video, this one happens to be from Ecuador, and you stop it, and you talk about it, you ask questions, you interact with it. All of those different pieces can still be done with the sharing screen. This is a particularly great set of where the little llama makes all these animals out of found objects, which was great because I had given that as an asynchronous activity. But so I stop it repeatedly so kids can try and guess what the animal is before it is finished. So kids have a lot of fun, and then when it's finally revealed, it's very cute. So you can still obviously do those things on Zoom. Again, we don't have to throw out what works. Bring it into your synchronous life. Singing songs, I did that too. I brought back fun songs. Oh, I should have said that was something else that I did send home for the asynchronous, were links to songs and videos that kids already knew, kind of like a connection to what's familiar. So they could enjoy those again, and then I would add like extra activities to go along with those. But I really wanted kids to feel like kind of like those little memories and connections to our class. Some other things that worked really well were, so again, remembering too, I had kindergarten through fourth graders all together. That dynamic is very different than had I had single level classes. I really loved it. I loved seeing siblings together and helping one another. I thought it was really, really cool. But it definitely created some challenges, right? So everything I did on Zoom had to be accessible for everybody. But so this is two different guessing games where one of them I have magnetic letters, and I would spell out a word, and kids had to try and guess it before all the letters were up. Very much inspired by Wheel of Fortune. Which I've been watching a lot of. It's one of those things that, I remember watching game shows with my grandparents as a kid, and it's been very soothing during the pandemic. But I thought, wow, we could do that in a world language classroom. And my kids had so much fun with that. And so they kind of had an idea of what the word set was going to be that they had to choose from. So it wasn't like just any random word. So it's going to be a number. So you just have to figure out which number it is. But they loved that. This one with the jar was an estimation game, which I love doing in class, where you have a bunch of whatever item it is, you put them in the jar, and then they have to try and guess how many are in the jar. And what I did was I had kids bring paper with them, and they had to jot down the number, their guess, on their piece of paper first. That makes it accessible to even your lowest novice. because they don't have to produce, they're writing it down, they're listening, and they're writing it down. And so it's just one of those activities that's really, really great. Even like my kindergartners, this is highly accessible for them. And I did multiple rounds with both of those activities. So guessing games are, they're a lot of fun. Kids can access them in a lot of different ways at different levels. Another one that was a lot of fun was, so I had scavenger hunt, as I mentioned, for asynchronous, but I also did scavenger hunt during Zoom, where I would say, and I had my visual, so I'd say, okay, go find something orange, and I'd point to orange, and then they would race off and grab something and bring it back and show it. So again, it's just a listening comprehension activity. Remember bringing my expectations down, but they loved it. And I know a lot of people have talked about that online, different ways that they have done it. I chose vocabulary sets that kids we already knew. So colors was a big one, so go find something orange. Now go find something white. Go find, and it was, again, funny things that appeared when they brought them back, but it got them moving, it got them engaged, it had everybody together. And then I would, try and comment on each one of them and try to follow up with the older kids who could interact with a little bit more language. So those were a lot of fun. So those were some, not all, but some. These were my takeaways for Zoom. Expect the unexpected. For all of you who did Zoom, the cat that was right up in front, of the cat butt, really. The hamster that was doing all kinds of weird tricks, the kids that would disappear, slide off my screen. There were all these weird things. Things that I didn't expect, but definitely you realize right away, parents or family members are right there. So if you can engage them, that's really cool, but they're also whispering to their kids like the answers or telling them what to do. Again, those things that would never happen in my classroom. So I was like, whoa, whose voices, because I did not mute them. I know a lot of teachers have muted their students. I only muted in a few different instances, but I wanted it to be interactive. So there was interaction. The only time I muted was if there was something where I was demonstrating and I really just did not want any of that background noise. But for the most part, I wanted us all to be able to converse just like we would in class. And they were really good about respecting that. For the most part, I had fewer interruptions. Even with it not being on mute, it was fascinating. It's just like all these things that were really fascinating. And this other takeaway, which I mentioned with the polls, was really teaching that tech explicitly. Sometimes as a specialist teacher, I build off of what is already happening in the homeroom. And so but then that also means that I make some assumptions around what is happening in the homeroom. And this was one of those cases where I made an assumption, knowing that homeroom teachers were using Zoom, that the kids were more familiar with some of the tech than they were. Of course, the homeroom teachers were learning Zoom at the same time, right? But so that was definitely, communicating with other teachers as to what they were doing, but also just really making sure that I was teaching that tech explicitly if there was something that I wanted a kid to do. However that might look. Normally what I do in the classroom is either I have instructions that are in order, or I take multiple pictures of the steps so that I don't have to translate into English, right? So the idea being, in this instance with the poll, what I wish I had done was I wish I had taken screenshots of each step that I could show kids and walk them through what they would need to do in order to be able to annotate. That's for next year. Living and learning. And the last thing that I just want to say before I wrap up is that this was the biggest takeaway of all, and I think that all of us feel this, that nothing was as important as being present and connecting with the students. Content, for the most part, great. I don't want to say that it didn't happen, but I was less concerned with my students staying where they were even, and certainly not learning something new with Spanish. as I was for them just knowing that I was there. And so I did multiple things, and there were so many more things I could have done and wish I had done, but lots of, I would send home just like little videos saying hello to each little kid in a class, or, you know, writing a little note that mentioned them individually, or continually asking the question, how are you? We do that in class all of the time, but that's part of that community building that's so important. Making sure that I was responding, you know, all of the time, letting kids know, and the secondary piece of it, letting kids know that I was there, and also inviting them into kind of my personal life. Like, my dogs featured in a variety of things. Their pets did. That was one of the greatest things about Zoom Live. As much as it was funny, like, you're seeing these weird things, you were also seeing a side to your kids that you just didn't, you know, I just never got to see because that was their home life. So that, you know, what we call the, you know, in language learning, you know, the interpersonal piece was by far the most important thing that I think we have to keep in mind, is keeping that connection with our kids. So I'm going to end there. That was a lot, and I hope there was something new there for you, or that sparks an idea for you, or you say, oh yeah, you know, maybe it's reaffirming. And I would love to, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that if people have questions or they want clarification about something, that I can provide that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Here we are. I'm narrating what I'm doing. Okay, so we're back. So questions or comments, if you can either raise a hand or use the little Zoom hand feature icon. Victoria, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, I'm just curious about how many kids did you have? You said K through 4 altogether?
Mm-hmm.
What are you talking, like 20 kids or?
Yeah, so we decided as specials that we were going to, each of us actually limited it a little bit differently. I limited it to, originally I limited it to 18 per session. But then what happened within the first week was that we had some no-shows.
Yeah.
And in fact, as we went on, we had more and more no-shows. Homeroom teachers were experiencing that. It wasn't just us. Mm-hmm. So I bumped it up to, I think it was like 25. And even then there were, you know, not always, it was never a full 25. Mm-hmm. Our music teacher did 30 to 35, but hers was not interactive, mm-hmm. or not as much. I really wanted it to be like in class where I am talking to the individual kids. We are talking back and forth. We are interacting. And I didn't want it to be that I would have to go to another screen in order to be able to see everybody in the Zoom. That may be out of my control next year, dependent on the class size. But we had the ability to make those decisions during this time. But yeah, and it was, I mean, I had kindergartners, I had fourth graders, and everything in between, and from all different classes, which really hit home for me how brave those kids were who did show up, because there were many kids on that Zoom that they did not know. Maybe they had seen in the hallway or had seen on the bus, but weren't necessarily their friends, weren't their siblings, weren't even in their own classrooms. And so that was pretty neat. You know, even though it was by choice, and I really wish there were some kids that didn't show up that I really wish had, but it was pretty neat. It was a neat dynamic.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions or comments or clarifications? Sachiko?
So how many Zoom meetings every day? Did you have it every day or?
So we had to fit in with the rest of the schedule that was going on. The homeroom teachers had a variety of morning meetings and lunch bunches, and then there was Title I, and there were lots of other things that were happening throughout the day. And so we decided that we were going to have special Zooms. Each of us was going to take a day, and so I had 2 classes, 2 Zoom meetings on Wednesdays. And then there were 2 musics on Monday and 2 phys ed on Tuesday, because of all these other limitations that we had. And what was interesting, we had thought we evolved as we went. Because the first week we only did 1, and then we had only opened it up for 1, and then we had this kind of like avalanche of signups, and so we added a second session. And then we thought, oh, we're going to have to add a third session and maybe a fourth. Well, then as it turned out, it kind of stabilized pretty quickly how many families were signing up. Again, it was by choice. So, you know, there's some families who are just more engaged and active in these types of things than others, or they had other things on their schedule, or I'm not even sure. And so it did stabilize in terms of how many were signing up even generally. So I'm not sure if we had opened it up to even more sessions, whether we would have, I guess that's what I'm trying to say is, I don't know how many more sessions had I added, if we would have gotten lots more participation or participation from different families. I don't know. It was a grand experiment.
So what time is your Zoom meeting then?
I did a 10:30 and an 11:30. And I did them for about 20 minutes. Originally, I had thought, because we had seen a lot of feedback that shorter was better. So initially, we were thinking 15 minutes, which is shorter than my normal classes are 30 minutes. As it turned out, 15 minutes was, you know, you have to factor in that kids are not all arriving at the same time. And so I ended up extending most of the time. It was 20-25 minutes on average. That was kind of the nice thing, was that you were a little bit more flexible than you are in a physical building. You know, I am so conscious about the beginning and end times of my classes because my kids have other places to be, or they're coming from other places. And so I am freakish about, you know, being on time. And so this was kind of a weird thing too, to be really flexible. We started the first one where we did 10:30 and then 11 o'clock, and that was not enough time in between to stop, get yourself, you know, get a drink of water, do whatever you need to do, and then transition and, you know, have everything set up again. So having a little bit like 15 or 20 or like 20 minutes or so before I opened up the next one really helped.
Thank you. That's good. We didn't even have a Zoom meeting. Only classroom teacher had.
We, before April break, we had a conversation as a team, and there were some ideas floating around of how specials were going to go live, which did not have to do with our content. And we really wanted to be able to interact with kids with our content. Not that we were trying to teach new things, but I'm a Spanish teacher, so I really wanted to interact with kids on some level with Spanish. And so we came up with this idea and proposed it and said, this is what we would really like to do, is if we want to increase live interactions with students, and our district wants the specials to be part of that, this is what we would like it to look like. And our principal was super, excited and interested in that. It just hadn't even been thought of as an idea. So when we brought it forward, it was, yeah, let's try that. So, which was really great. We had a lot of support.
That's great.
Yeah. Still tons to learn. And I think the other piece that's huge, and we're talking about this a lot as a team right now, is, so this was by choice. What is this going to look like in the fall when it's not by choice, right? It's not by sign up. You're going to have whole classes, or or partial classes that are remote. What is there going to be any accountability? We didn't have, everything was optional. Even the homeroom teachers, everything was optional. So, but what does that look like going forward, right? I mean, these are the conversations everybody is having, and trying to figure that out is really challenging. Without just saying, do whatever you want, We could do that too, though, Next year is the year that isn't, So I kind of feel like it's like the Twilight Zone year, Who knows? Thoughts? Questions? Yeah, Angela.
I have to log out, but I wanted to say thank you because this was very helpful for me, and I wanted to appreciate you taking the time to give some really good ideas and let us know we're, you know, all in this together. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm glad that something was useful. It's like I say, I feel like I'm right there with everybody else. So I'm learning too. It's weird.
Yeah, it is weird. I really just want to wake up and say this is all over. Like this was just a big dream, and we're back at school in the regular. Just
Right?
thinking that's going to happen. And
I know.
Yeah.
It feels so surreal.
Yeah. Right. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Chris, I think you're still muted. Oop.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. My biggest concern are kids that I've never met before in September, because that's going to be a bunch of groups. And I'm like, how do you connect with a second grader that you've never had a class with before?
I know. I've been thinking about this a lot, and our team has been thinking about this a lot. And I said to Lavinia last week when we were talking, and this is one of these weird things that I thought of, but I thought to myself, because I've been doing a lot of watching other videos of people, online doing, whatever it might be. And I've been watching a lot of Sesame Street. And, and it occurred to me, kids love Elmo and they've never met Elmo. Kids love all of these characters that they see on TV or online that they've never met in person. So how can we leverage that dynamic as a world language teacher, right? There's got to be a way. And, I'm thinking about it a lot too. I use puppets in my class a lot. So I'm definitely like, I've got to leverage my puppets even more to interact and be that kind of edutainment with kids, to be able to connect with them. I was really in despair at one point around that exact question. We're going to have a whole batch of, in my school, we're going to have a whole batch of incoming kindergartners, right? And I spend so much time just getting to know them and learning their names and connecting with them as, people. And how am I going to do that on a screen? And Elmo is able to do it, right? Dora is able to do it. There's like, Big Bird is able to do this, right? So I've been watching them a lot to kind of see, like, how do they do it? So they interact back and forth. They're really like talking to the viewer. So if you have them on Zoom and you can see their names and you don't allow them to change their names, a friend of mine learned on Zoom that if you allow that, you're going to get all kinds of crazy names. And that you say to the parents, secondarily, is there any way that you can make it so the kid's name is what's showing, not the family name? That was another thing. Sometimes I was like, oh my God, who is that? Because it would say something different than the kid's name. But, so if you're interacting with them individually as you're seeing them on Zoom, you're saying their name, you're making observations, you're interacting with them on a personal level, I truly think, hope, and believe that that is going to build those initial relationships. Will it be the same as in the classroom where you get hugs and you're interacting, you're high-fiving, which we're not going to do anymore anyway, all those things? I do believe that we can connect with them. It's kind of that idea that I mentioned before of things that work in our classroom. How do we adjust them to an online setting? I think the asynchronous, if that's all we've got, that's going to be really hard. But even so, if we are thinking about, again, and this is slightly not slightly, this is an unproven theory. But it is my theory that if Elmo can connect, I can connect. I have to observe him. I have to think about what works in my classroom, how I interact with kids. What is it that I use that gets kids motivated? What are the kinds of activities that kids get most motivated by? One of the things that I used as a frame, I didn't mention this and I'm sorry, but with the Zoom meetings, I used as a frame the concept of a summer camp rather than class. So it was not work. There was no work. It was, and that sounds kind of weird to me. I don't know why. But anyway, it was the idea of we are going to have fun together, bar none. And not that we don't have fun together in the classroom, but there was like an additional, it's gotta be fun. Like I have got to be, and that was weird for me. Like I don't picture myself as really an entertainer, and I don't necessarily, like school is not all about entertaining. But in order to maintain that connection and thinking about what does this look like with other people, I definitely recognize that, using my puppets and using my visuals and that kind of thing could leverage that for me. It, again, unproven theory, because I'm worrying about it too. I'm worrying about it a lot. Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah, you guys can all unmute if you want. Yeah, I think that's yeah. Ugh. It's weird. What do you think, Chris? What do you?
No, it's good. I was just gonna thank you. This is the 4th Zoom of the day today for all of us, and it was the best one. So
Oh, thank you.
by far, it was inspirational.
Oh no!
Put some
Thank
wind-
you.
wind
I'm gonna have to
back
watch it for
girl.
myself to keep myself going. I'm so happy.
So now Chris is working with me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's a new Spanish and French teacher after.
Oh, very cool.
Yes.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Very, very nice.
That is awesome. Yeah. Has anyone heard? Well, probably none of. I don't know if anyone has even heard what school's going to look like next year for their district. Yeah.
Saying that half of students come to school.
Yeah.
No.
At their home.
What, Michelle? Oh, hi, Michelle.
I know. Exactly what you said in the beginning. It's going to be hybrid, which means that we have to be ready to teach technology and can't figure out how they're going to include kids online at the same time. It means some sort of device that will follow the teacher, but then you get into privacy concerns.
Yep.
Because parents are looking at our computers at one point.
Yeah.
The child's computers at one point, and they can see the kids with special needs and stuff. But in other schools I was at, they had robots that went in on behalf of kids, but I have a feeling we can't afford those.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we are looking at, I believe that we are going to be a one-to-one device district next year for elementary. We have for middle school and high school, but this has really kind of highlighted that as a need. We've just used carts that are shared by multiple classes up to this point. And the other piece that we're really trying to figure out is platform. So what are we going to use as a digital platform, even if it's only to be used, part of the time, but is it going to be Seesaw? Is it going to be Google Classroom? Is it going to be, one of the pieces of feedback that we got from parents was the sheer number of logins. So, really trying to minimize that as much as we can and try and keep everything as central as possible. But then again, when you have a 5-year-old who doesn't know how to use the technology, it makes it really challenging.
And I recommend your blog on carts, since you mentioned them. Everyone should read it. It's very good.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I actually, it's funny you say that, Michelle, because I feel like I have to update that for, what it means to be remote. But yeah, it's a blog post on just, ways to organize yourself for being on a cart. I was on a cart for 13 years and between 3 buildings at the same time. So those were good times. And that was back before we had smart boards. I was still using, you know, the projectors and AV equipment on a cart. That was fun. Yeah, so it's scary. I don't know. But if you guys are, I do want to say, if you are on Facebook and you are part of the Maine World Language Facebook group, that's a really great place to connect for language teachers in Maine. And I would also say, Lavinia mentioned now the National Network for Early Language Learning, which is our national advocate for teaching at the elementary level. We do not do the early lang chat in the summer, but we do it throughout the school year, every other Wednesday, and it is a really great place if you are interested in getting on Twitter. It's a great place to connect with other teachers around the country. Thank you, Lavinia. And I will say, we are having Nell is having a summer summit institute entirely online, virtually, in July. And I think, correct me, Michelle, I don't know if you remember, Lavinia, if I've put that information in the main Facebook group yet or not. I did. So there's going to be a lot of presenters from around the country. I'm giving a presentation that's a little bit different than this one, but just a variety of topics, a lot of them connecting to remote learning. And they're all teachers at the elementary level, so I'm really looking forward to that. Nell is, it's us. That's what I love about it. It's an organization for us, you know, not a conference or an organization for high school teachers that happens to, you know, put an elementary session in there every now and again. So that's why I love them. Other thoughts or questions? And certainly, I know it sounds like you guys must have some serious Zoom fatigue. I'm investing, and I haven't done it yet, but I wish I had. I'm investing in those glasses for screens, those blue, can't remember what they're called, like blue lenses or something, that are supposed to cut down some of the glare.
Yeah, let me show you. So these are the ones that aren't like that. And these are the ones that are like that.
Do they help?
Yes.
Okay.
A ton.
And you can get them with a prescription.
You're also not reflecting off the glare as well. So, because you can tell the difference between the two.
Okay, that's seeing this.
Yeah, you know how you're talking about connecting with kids. Well, they can't see your eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've never been online so much. And not even just with Zoom, just like, you know, just like you're doing curriculum work or you're answering emails. I've never had my eyes on a computer so much during the day.
Yeah. So I used to do online for 5 years prior to this. So these do not have anything around them. So when you get them, get no frame around your glasses so they can see your face, and you're just focus on your eyes.
Oh, great advice. Thank you. Jess, I think I noticed your hand.
Well, just when she mentioned the eyes, it brought up this point. Our school, I work at a private school, and you know, we're planning to be in the classroom. That's our hope, but we don't know what that'll look like, obviously.
Right.
And you know, whether kids will have to be wearing masks, us teachers will have to be wearing masks, and thinking about that and teaching the language, where so much of what they're seeing is, you know, watching your mouth form these words. And
right.
Anyway, it's just an interesting, another challenge to it.
Yeah, there are masks that have a cutout.
Yep.
For deaf people. So if you can get one of those, I think that's definitely, yeah, because I can't even imagine. You know, so much is communicated by our face and our mouth and how we talk. And yeah, I know. I'm I mean, not to mention, you know, what 5-year-old's going to keep that mask on for any more than like 2 seconds. But, you know, one thing that my school has been, you know, we've been looking at what other schools around the world are doing and talking about ways that we can incorporate, you know, other spaces, you know, outdoors or other spaces within the class or within the school to try and kind of like spread out. You know, there's a lot of, we have a school garden, so I use it anyway, but, you know, ways that I can utilize that more. yeah, I have 3 beds this year. I was like all excited. You know, at the beginning of the school closure, I had this crazy idea. I think we all did. That it was going to be over in a couple of months, and then things were just going to, you know, next year, you know, so I was like planning all this stuff for next year as if it was going to be like how it was. And I had this whole, like, you know, so anyway, so I had arranged to get 3 beds in the school garden instead of 1. And now I'm like, I may be totally remote now. I won't be able to get into the garden. I'm like, ah! It was kind of weird, but it is what it is. Crazy times. Well, I will let you guys go. I think that Lavinia will share my email if people want to reach out to me again. Please absolutely feel free to do that, or connect with me online in other ways. Absolutely. Super happy and would love to see you in the main Facebook group. I'm really, as the Flame Plus representative, I'm really trying to connect with other elementary teachers and really try to find ways to support you guys, and support all of us and make us not feel so alone. So yeah. So thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of the afternoon. Rest your eyes.
Thank you.
Thank you.